And so if we're going to try and really have you on a diet, we're really feeding your brain, you're really promoting brain growth. It's going to be the foods that contain the most of these nutrients that promote BDNF.
Welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jesse. It's nice to see you. How's everything?
I'm doing well. Things are good. I read your latest book preparing for this and I have a lot of questions, so I'm ready to dive into it.
Well, first, thank you for reading Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. I appreciate that, and it's nice to be here. And for everyone listening, it's I appreciate to have some of your time to talk to you about food and your brain and how to best feed it.
Sounds good. Well, I'm curious just to start to set the scene here. As someone who is trained as a conventional medical doctor, when along your timeline did you first become aware of food and its influence on mental health?
I don't know, probably when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I mean, I think I've just always thought about food as a really important part of my health. I think that's just a value of my family and what I grew up thinking about. My parents moved out to really a rural part of the United States in the 1970s, and I grew up on a farm. So we grew a lot of our own food and just the ritual of food and the way that food and nourishment were important for health and mental health was just always a family value. I think for me, in terms of after medical school, and then when I was at Columbia University training as a psychiatrist, there was a new class of medications. There was a lot of weight gains. There was a lot of thinking around interventions and diet, but more on the like, how do we undo these side effects? And it just kind of got me thinking a lot about food. At that point in my personal life, I was also a low-fat vegetarian, and there was all this data coming out about omega-3 fats in seafood, and it just really had me kind of start trying to build my diet from the ground up. And the same thing for my patients, like what are the most important foods for mental health? What, if you're going to make a list of the top 5 foods to fight depression, like what would they be? And there wasn't that any of that. I mean, none of that was going on in mental health. This is back, I don't know, 2005, 2006. And that just really kind of lit a fire in me. Like, I want to be eating those foods. And if I'm in the business of helping people with depression and anxiety, I want to be recommending those foods. And that just sort of brings us to today where, there's been, besides the common sense that it helps, there's just been a lot of science that's helped direct us in what we recommend people should eat for brain health.
Well, it's interesting you had such an early start with food. Like you mentioned, you made that move from Long Island out to Indiana. So let's talk about that at the time. You're 5 years old, your family decides to make this move. Are you enthused about it at the time, or is there resistance there?
Oh man, Jesse, I'm gonna like messed up here. I want to go back to 5. I haven't done that on a podcast yet. Let's see. I think that I was excited about the prospect of being in the country. I think to grow up as a country kid, as all country kids listening know, there's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of nature. So there's this really mix of a lot of space that I think a lot of kids don't have, and a lot of it snows and you can be out there for 10, 12 hours just playing in your field or playing in the woods. So in terms of moving and the anticipation of moving, it's hard to remember that far back. I mean, I, I knew it was going to be an adventure, and that always excited me as a kid. And I'd spent some time out in Indiana and in the country, and so I was intrigued.
And what was the catalyst of that move? Why did your parents want to get out there? Was it for that more space you're talking about, or was there a job that pulled you guys there?
No, I think they were very much a part of a movement in the United States around going back to the land, back to the earth, being self-sufficient, growing your own food, being off the grid. Those are things that sometimes are a little more popular now. And after a pandemic and a quarantine, people are thinking a little bit more about. But there's a whole wave of folks in the United States who've been thinking about that for 50 years. And I think that was the catalyst. This was also when nuclear kind of arms were really, there was just such a tension in the world. And so a lot of people were just terrified that there was going to be this nuclear event. And a lot of folks just moved out to the rural middle of nowhere and got ready for that. So yeah, my parents were part of that.
And just to paint a bit of a picture what that lifestyle looked like, were you guys growing a lot of your own food? Did you have animals on the farm? Just give
Yeah,
me an idea what day to day looked like.
yeah, day to day, I mean, so there's a lot of food growing and food storing, kind of building the capacity for that, like, nice basements and thinking about getting our own water. We have a cave on our land, so building a cistern and the pumps to get that up to the house. We had we still do active passive solar house, so um, we dug a pond and stocked it with 500 catfish, which we fed and grew into this. What would always surprise city folks when you'd take them for a swim, and then you'd walk over afterwards and with the bucket of food after everybody had gotten out of the pond and feed the catfish, and it looked like when those in the movies when the animals like cross the Nile and get like devoured. It's just so there's a lot of the chickens. We didn't have a ton of animals growing up. They mainly focused on vegetables and just a lot of vegetables you put down, a lot of tomatoes, um, a lot of things like dried herbs, and that's what it looked like. A lot of dogs.
And when it came to the catfish, were you guys growing those so you could eat them, or what was their purpose?
Yeah, yeah. People, yeah, that was the purpose. Eating them, and then it's just a good sustainable food supply.
And I'm curious, growing up in such an alternative, lifestyle, being in the country, being on the farm, it's interesting you took a path of more conventional medicine. Was that something in you since you were a kid, or how did you become interested in that?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, for me, it doesn't feel so much like from non-conventional to conventional. I mean, to be, I got really interested in science, and I just think, doctors are held in a really special place in society, and I think the notion of being of service and the idea that between kind of training my psychology, but also learning this knowledge base, I could help people, I could save lives potentially. That just, I don't know, that was really exciting. Also, Indiana is in the middle of the United States. It's one of these states that just, it's funny. I trained in New York, which it's a little bit different, but it's still a place that really kind of thinks about medicine and conventional medicine, at least back then, in very traditional ways. And it's really it was like a special place to train and kind of come up through the Indiana University medical education system. I got to live in Bloomington for a few years in a really small group of like 30 medical students, and then was what we call the Mecca in Indianapolis, this collection of hospitals where all of the really complicated things in Indiana come to. And so eh, eh, for me, there's this kind of mix of both all this natural stuff, the food, nutritional psychiatry, and also this kind of, I don't know, for me, this appreciation and also fascination with, what is the cutting edge of conventional medicine. I don't know, for me, I love having both of those. I can hear what you're saying. Like one sounds like weird hippies, like fleeing nuclear fallout and canning vegetables, and the other sounds like conventional medicine. But, for me, that's just who I am. Those like, I love both of those things so much. It's hard for me to imagine a world where they're separate.
No, I was just curious. Like you said, just picturing you guys, out there farming, living off the land. It wouldn't have been surprising if, you got into naturopathic medicine or chiropractic or something more alternative,
Yeah,
but you chose a more conventional route of medicine. I just found that interesting.
it's true, Jesse. And also, maybe I'm old now and I'm not remembering it as well as like when I was in my 20s and my struggle with that. Because I did when I was in college. I went to an acupuncturist for my really a bad time with my back and just loved that treatment. And I learned to meditate when I was in high school. And I had a lot of massage, and I used to carry around these little like acupressure cards, like palm and feet. I couldn't tell. I was like trying to pick up girls, but also it was like I don't think so. I think I was really like fascinated that there was a way that you could like help people with touch, and you could kind of energetically sort of help people with things just with a set of needles. So it is interesting. I think early in my career I thought I would probably head that way. I think probably in my own way within psychiatry, the notion of psychotherapy fascinated me so much. Where to me it was just really this fascinating notion where there aren't any pills or any needles or any scalpels. There's just you and your patient, and that's all there is. And it's just both of your minds, and based on the way that you communicate, the way you open, the way you associate, that healing of some way can come. that really that really captivated me in some way that yeah, and that in some ways doesn't allow, there aren't a lot of good psychotherapists, or many of us, who there's no body work involved in mental health. There's very little acupuncture. It's really just mental. So
You talked about adopting a vegetarian diet. Did that happen at an early age? And how did that come about?
it happened when I was 20. I had an uncle, a really special uncle, my uncle Bob, who was he was actually a psychiatrist, only psychiatrist I knew, and really into exercise. And I think, like a lot of people, kind of in the low fat, uh, um, like plant based ideology of food. Cholesterol has been this idea that cholesterol is bad, eggs are bad, meat's bad, and kind of best based in, I would say, traditional um, cardiology prescriptions about food. And yeah, and I was an athlete at that time. I was a medical student at that time, and it felt very righteous to me because I was also in Indiana, where there's a lot of pork and meat and fast food, and um, I was running track and playing basketball. So in these vans, like going all over the Midwest, and like everyone's getting like double cheeseburgers, and I'm getting like, I'll take two veggie burgers and like an order of fries and a frosty because that's a vegetarian meal. And um, yeah, I think it was a hope to eat based on the evidence. And then I think I went through this real revolution in how I thought about the evidence as I learned more about it, and realized I hadn't really had much of a balanced education about it. And then as I began to think, focusing much more on my specialty, on mental health, on brain health, on human happiness and human functioning, in the way that not just nutrients and single nutrients and fear is what we need to be talking about, but the overall way as physicians and as health professionals that we can integrate nourishment as a foundational piece of what we do and how we help people achieve optimal health. That we don't just, especially in mental health, we just exist in the treatment sector now. You never ever talk to a mental health professional in a preventative fashion, and everybody else in medicine gets to do that. And like, you're a man, you're thinking about, or a woman, anybody thinking about like colon cancer screening, right? That's like on your radar. Prevention, cardiology. There's a way you're thinking about eating for heart health or cancer, but there's not a lot in terms of our mental health that we do besides think about treatment. And I think that's really I think that's really changing. I think as we reduce stigma, it's really a very exciting time as we think about mental health.
Let's talk about the progression on the vegetarian diet. Did you feel good eating that way for a number of years, or how did that play itself out?
It wasn't a very mentally good time for me, Jesse. If I think back on it, I was very fatigued. I had a really hard time in the middle of the day. I used to, I'm embarrassed to say this, I used to like sneak off, and I would find like places in the hospital where I could take off my white coat and roll it up and put it in my bag and like put myself in a chair and fall asleep. And part of that is just fatigue of being in medical school, but part of it, I remember I actually spoke to like a couple of counselors in college and then in medical school of like, and I had checked out my doctors, like, is there something else I should be doing? Because I'm just like, I don't mean to be disrespectful. Like, I'm a good student. It was very important to me to always like, do well in school. But I would just, it would be like literally somebody hit the off switch and I would just fall asleep. Like almost like a narcolepsy, I thought. And I think a lot of it was just living on carbohydrates and not living on, what I think a lot of people struggle with, and not, at least at that point, the healthiest version of a vegetarian diet. I was a lot of carbs, a lot of pastas, a lot of snack whale cookies, a lot of veggie burgers, a lot of processed food as I think about it now. I think my progression is I uh, went to residency, and then I was in New York, where it was still weird to be a vegetarian, but not as weird. And also, it's New York, it's like it's wonderful. You can find a million different crazy, fun, wonderful, wonderful companions and whatever shenanigans you're up to. So New York was wonderful for me. And also, there's a way that like New York's on the sea and you're around seafood and oyster bars and oyster happy hour and young chefs who love seafood. And I just got wrapped up in all of that. and friends from all over the world who, just really my palate exploded. And it was actually right after residency when I started eating. Actually, I took a trip to South America. I was in Paraguay, and I was on a cattle ranch, and I love horses, and I spent all day riding horses, and these friends of my parents, and they'd made this like traditional Paraguayan beef stew, and I started to salivate. I just kind of sat with that feeling, and I just thought like I don't know. I mean, at that point, I was a psychiatrist, and I was big on like really sitting with the and honoring the feelings that you're having, and it was interesting because years prior, as I'd become a vegetarian, meat had really disgusted me in some way. And it's always been fascinating to me in my life, those things like other people or foods or things where you have this intense feeling, right? You love them or care about them or it's your favorite thing. And then it's like, ugh, it's like you can't stand it anymore. It's just I don't know, such a fascinating human part of being human, I think. So anyway, in terms of my progression, I started eating little grass-fed beef, and I started thinking about really who am I as an eater? Like what matters to me? How am I making these decisions? And I realized it was not based on science I'd read. It was based on, I don't know, echo ideas I'd heard, stuff just everyone says, like sleep at 8 hours or drink 8 glasses of water or don't eat meat. And I just thought, that's definitely not fair to anybody. Me, my patients, that's not how I want to make my decisions. So I started working on the happiness diet. I started getting into reading all of the literature that I could about nutrition and food and mental health. I started going to conferences about food and like I don't know, everything from like cafeteria food to mind body medicine food trainings, and building a network of people who kept telling me the same thing. This is really important. And I just had a lot of mentors who just, so this is a good idea. This is really important. Keep doing this. So,
So you decide you're going to introduce meat back into the diet. Do you start to feel any different right away, or does that take time?
oh, it's such a biased answer, Jesse. No one's ever asked me this. I mean, I start, and also I think it's hard to, I always struggle to answer as a singular person where, I think there's a set of data around whether you should eat meat or not and a set of values. And I can certainly tell you what happened to me is like, no, I'm not tired anymore at 3. I don't eat tons of meat, but I certainly meat is a component and one of the I won't say prominent components, but certainly a piece of my diet. Seafood exploded into my diet. I eat seafood multiple times a week, but so did a lot of other things. When I was a vegetarian, I wasn't like going crazy on the kale. And now, I mean, I've gone through periods of my life where I eat kale every single day. Uh, so I think a lot evolved for me quickly as an eater. What changed in terms of how I felt? I mean, I don't know. Over that then next 10 years as I eat meat and fish and seafood, I've maybe a little more than 10 years, but it's hard to know. It's been the best of my professional life, but certainly it's been the most creative period of my life. I've written and published 4 books. I've done all this fun digital work that really is exciting and interesting in terms of getting to be in mental health, and such a wild idea instead of just being there, me and my couch, that you can inspire people to get help or to better understand themselves or to eat foods that might help them avoid depression. I mean, such a so who knows? Maybe that all would have happened if I would have stayed on my snack well cookies and veggie burgers. I've always been that kind of person, I guess. But I don't know. I feel those foods have helped, and especially now as I'm getting older and starting to I-50, it's really clear to me what foods I'm eating. Like 100%. Like I'm 100% focused on decreasing brain shrinkage. And that revolves around a couple of nutrients like vitamin B12 and DHA. You find those in meat and seafood. So, um, yeah, I think that's a little bit more about the progression, Jesse. I don't know. Does that explain it? I feel like
No, that's great. Let's talk about when somebody new comes to see you. Obviously, you're big into food and helping people navigate through that world. How quickly does that come up when somebody comes to you with a mental health challenge? Is this something on the first appointment you're going to bring up and find out what they're eating and try and steer them in the right direction? Or I mean, I'm sure you get a whole array of different types of people that you're working with. Some might be more into, natural health than others. I mean, naturally, there's going to be a full spectrum there. So, how do you go about introducing this concept to somebody that's working with you?
For sure, Jesse. It's a great question. And first, just these days, as my practice has been kind of full, I have just a wonderful team of clinicians where really patients who come to us in our digital nutritional psychiatry mental health clinic, you can kind of gradate how much you want. You can take one of our cooking classes or hop in with one of our coaches and work on a certain food group or overhauling your diet over the next 6 months, or you can work with a therapist to talk about maybe something that really you're struggling with, or get an assessment from one of our clinicians or psychiatrists. So food is, in some ways, we work with people to kind of titrate it in that we're always taking care of your mental health first. And then we hope for people that food and our other pieces of lifestyle psychiatry and mental fitness fit in. I like to, in my first session, when I meet a new patient, hear a little bit of how they take care of themselves. And so I'm just listening for how you move your body. I'm listening for how you think about food, and I'm listening for the relationships in your life. And usually in the first or second session, I'll get a little bit more detailed food history of walking through your day as an eater. The same thing we do in our e-course, Eat to Beat Depression, and something also I guide people through in the book is just kind of taking a nutritional history in broad strokes of like, how are you doing on these food categories? Like, just everybody can do it now. Just think about the last 3 or 4 days. Right? Did you eat leafy greens? Did you eat rainbow vegetables? Look at your plate and think about it. Put it in your mind for a second. Is it the beige colors of, I don't, do you call it the Canadian, modern Canadian? We call it the modern American diet or the standard American diet. It's sad or mad, which I like, but there's not like a Canadian version, right?
No,
The
I think we just adopt the SAD.
the SAD, the standard American. It's like you guys
Yeah.
deserve your own. You have your own toxic national foods for brain health. If you think about it, I mean, there are a few special that, but yeah, it's. Um, I'm looking for what people eat, where their self nourishment skills are, and their attitudes about it as a psychiatrist. If you're eating salmon because someone else told you to, or because you think you need to, or because you love it, those all kind of matter to me. Um, and then I'm looking for some like cultural piece. Everybody comes from a food culture, and I'd like to hear what that is for people, what food was like growing up for people, if there are particularly important, like moral or cultural values about food. So often it like, and we think that the only moral debate around food is like meat or no meat. But some people like myself, like I didn't eat chicken, I don't know, for 20 plus years, just because I don't know, I really like chickens. I like my relationship with chickens and eggs. And chicken just doesn't really excite me that much as a food. That seems really weird, but I wasn't really a vegetarian or not. I just, we all have different values and preferences and tastes around how we eat, and I hope to understand a little bit about that with people, and often find sometimes folks just haven't thought about it that much. Right? We're just like eating because we're hungry, or eating our favorite foods. And that's I also like to know what are people's favorite foods. Like Jesse, what's your favorite food?
Favorite food, I would say avocado.
Avocado. It's like it was
What
for the.
about you?
I mean, if I'm honest, I really love spaghetti and meatballs. I would say right now my favorite, which is sort of surprised I haven't had that in a while, but that's really generally been one of my favorite foods. I did brain food that up, and I think I've almost wholly replaced it with gnocchi with sardines, the sardine sauce that I make. That I think, if I'm honest, I like that one probably a little better than the meatballs these days. That's my complicated answer. Um,
Yeah, that's definitely a little bit more out there.
Yeah, Earl Grey tea is one of my favorites right now. I'm big into Earl Grey tea. I'm on sort of a kick.
Nice. So the chicken thing, let's come back to that. Are you eating chicken these days, or was this something that was a period early in your life that you didn't eat it?
I'm eating chicken these days. Yeah, I'm kind of in a spot of really trying to sit with almost all different types of foods. There's still some challenges, but yeah, chicken, not a lot. It's still sort of, I don't know, just doesn't really sit with me that well. But it's I think it's been interesting. For the last years, we've had chickens here on the farm, and they're really wonderful creatures. And so there's something about sitting in the emotional complexity of that, of having an animal and animals that you care about, and animals that same, a different one or one that you don't know that you eat of the same species. It's just, I find that really emotionally complex. Yeah. But I am eating chicken every now and then, in part because um, I didn't want my strange ideas about food and nutrition and chicken to rub off on my kids. I wanted them to get to develop their own strange ideas about it.
I see. And coming back to your story, you mentioned being on the farm. Part of your schooling, you went to New York, like you talked about, and you actually have a practice there. Now you're working online, but you ended up moving back to Indiana, and you have, you're living the alternative lifestyle again. So you've come back to what you're doing as a kid, and you're actually in the same home. So talk about that progression and why that was important to you to, get back to your roots.
Well, I really I sensed that the nature in the farm was really good for my kids and for my wife and for our dog. That was sort of living in both places, and you get to see them in the city. And New York City was wonderful for us, and we really enjoy our life there and our friends there. But there's something about, especially when you're in this very precious age of having young children and little babies, of kind of wandering around in safe space, and that's a little hard to do in New York. I mean, as much as we love the parks there, and there's something about the frenzy of New York and the kind of jockeying for space, that was challenging. And so and then my parents were getting older, and we kind of saw a window by which our kids could enjoy time with them. And so we came back to the farm. I actually commuted back and forth until the pandemic hit. So I'd spend a couple of days in New York City, and then the rest of the week on the farm here in Indiana. And it's been a really fascinating time to be on a farm, to be within a cycle of nature every day is really felt during the quarantine really like a rare view. I'd not ever, as much farm living as I'd never been on a farm in one place for hundreds of days in a row. And that happened to us where um, you just see the really slow, microscopic changes of the seasons. And it's really um, uh, I don't know, something to meditate on and to witness. And then it's just, I mean, for everybody who's in middle age, you're in this fascinating spot where you're seeing growth and life and skill acquisition in your kids, and then you're seeing age in your parents and in yourself. And so it's been a very rich and special time for all of us. I think very complex time, but nice time for our family.
And when it comes to managing the farm, planting plants, harvesting, I know you have chickens, collecting eggs. How involved in that aspect of the farming are you personally?
Well, part of being on a farm is understanding the scale and the goals of your farm. And so our farm really, our goals have been to preserve the nature and the forest here. In terms of scalability, as we've looked at growing a lot of food, or for a long time we grew a lot of hay, and we looked at the effects on our ecosystem, on our soil. We didn't like what we saw. And as anybody who's involved in farming knows, it's hard to be profitable on a farm. You end up really compromising. You're either, selling your trees because they're mature, as opposed to letting the forest do what it's always done, or you're putting on a lot of amendments. As my farmer said, I was talking about improving my soil quality, and I said, "Yeah, I did soil testing," and he said, "Yeah, I did soil testing." I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, I put amendments on my soil until I ran out of money, and then I went back to farming the same bad hay." Sort of this doesn't feel like a sustainable. And then in terms of larger animals, as you live on a farm and you see the turkeys come through, and the red foxes and the blue herons and the bobcats and all the other creatures of the farm, I came out here really gung ho, excited about a whole regenerative agriculture movement and adding more animals. We had some goats for a while, which were wonderful creatures to have. But it didn't feel for us right now the direction we wanted to head in terms of what to do with our land. And so mostly we've just enjoyed seeing what grows here. Like we've had bumper crops of butternut squash, the hops go gangbusters. Our garlic crop has been really nice, and really trying to um, explore and experience and feed ourselves as best we can. Although, we do an okay-ish job of that still, not as good as I'd like some years.
How much of the food that you guys are consuming are you growing yourselves?
It's going to be seasonal. I would say that's a hard percentage to get right. I mean, because there's some things that, like the wild salmon, the frozen seafood, that like that's in my diet every week, and that's pretty calorically dense. I would say in the summer, at the height of a summer where the garden's popping, I would say everything that is on my plate. If I'm eating grass-fed beef from our neighbor, which is maybe once or twice a week, everything on that plate will have its carbon based on my farm. Um, all of the plants will be eating, whether it's the potatoes or the asparagus or the okra or the onions or the garlic, and that's a real treat. I wish that were more common in our lives, but there are some meals like that, height of summer. As we get into fall, then you're talking storage vegetables. So we'll definitely, if it's a good year for butternut squash, we've had a real problem with some squash borers, beetles. It's the other thing is you start to grow your own food. You just have these moments where you've worked hard, you've prepped the soil, you've worked on the drainage, you've got your seedlings, you've got them in, you've mulched, you've watered, you've taken care of these, you've got the fruit on the vine, and then you come out the next day and all the plants are dead. Or you come out the next day and like some deer, they didn't even eat them, they just ran through them. And so I mean, it's it just teaches you about valuing food and a whole other. But to answer your question, I don't know. I would say in the summer, I'm gonna say 30 to 40% of the calories and probably 80% of my plant calories, because I'll do lots and lots of tomatoes and lots of greens from here. 0% of my cheese calories, and then we do a half cow share with our neighbor who um, that I mean it's not exactly our farm, but we help them out with little hay and it feels close. It's the same grass, it's just across the street.
When you talk about the pests there and the deer coming through and trampling over produce,
Oh, and the raccoons that eat the chickens. Gosh, Jesse, since you
uh,
want to talk a lot about my childhood and my like trauma, yeah, that was one of the strangest moments for me in the pandemic. I was giving this talk at the Brain Health Center at the University of Texas, I think in Houston, and they're introducing me. I'm like in the little Zoom green room, and it's like I don't know, 8 p.m. at night, 9 p.m., and the sun's coming down, and I'm in my little blue shirt, trying to act professional, and I hear this like boom, 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 and I kind of open my screen door, and they say, "And Dr. Drew Ramsey," and I say, "Hi, everyone," and as I do that, I start to hear the screams of my chickens as raccoons eating them alive. And it's just this really weird moment of like I really don't know what am I supposed to tell the audience. Like, so sorry to seem shocked. My favorite chickens are being eaten alive by the raccoons right now as we speak, and I don't know what to do. Or do you like hit pause and go scream? I did hit pause and I went and yelled at the raccoon, but it didn't help. So anyway, sorry. Talking about pests, the worst are the raccoons. Yeah, they eat your chickens.
how many chickens did you lose?
Let's see, last season, well, we hatched. That's one of those specialist things if you have a farm or in the country or just have curious children to incubate chicks and then raise them until they lay. It's about a 6 month process. It only takes 28 days to hatch an egg, and you can buy an incubator on the internet anywhere. Uh, we probably went through about 35 in the past year.
No, but from the raccoon attack, how many did you lose then?
Oh, and that raccoon attack, that was just one or two. They pick them off one or two at a time.
So what I was getting at back when we were talking about the pests, specifically like the bugs and the deer coming through and trampling, I've done a little bit of gardening myself over the last number of years, and it's interesting when you grow food and you deal with pests and you see what, all that hard work ends up producing food wise. You grow a new appreciation for going to the supermarket and picking up a container of organic strawberries or blueberries or a bushel of kale. Like I think it's such an interesting thing to do, just to grow a little bit of food and to kind of, for me, it's been a real exercise in rethinking when you see, a certain price tag on organic produce, even at Whole Foods where they might upcharge a little bit. It's like a lot goes into growing that. And I'm sure you've had a similar experience, growing your own food.
For sure, Jesse. I mean, I think it's one of the things that I encourage people to grow a little bit of food, just to see it and see, also the way it tastes a little different, and that's a little hard sometimes. But especially when the tomatoes that come out of our garden ripe, it just doesn't taste like a tomato in the supermarket, and so it does make you appreciate it and the effort that goes into it. I think it actually makes you appreciate all food. Like even if I'm like on a road trip and I'll have some fast food, or or racing around and there's not another option we haven't planned. There's some way that even with that I'll be like, this is amazing that for $10 you get this garbage and I feel full. Like this is like it's even though it's horrible stuff and I try not to eat that, it does give you gratitude and appreciation for having food security for sure.
So, Drew, let's get into some of the nitty gritty here. So, if somebody's suffering from depression, anxiety, and they come to see you, what are some of the foods, the heavy hitters that you'll encourage them to at least consider?
So I like to walk people through food categories that just have more of the important nutrients for anxiety and for depression. It's the same thing I do in the book in a certain way, which is focusing on food categories and thinking, okay, like omega-3 fats look important in the research for mental health and brain health. You only get long-chain omega-3 fats in a few places, seafood or in an algal supplement. Where does this person get it? And then how can we work on that food category? So in the book, I go through each of my kind of favorite categories of food. There's leafy greens. And then thinking, if I say leafy green and you think salad, excuse me, I want you to kind of up level your game a little bit and think more about things like pesto or kale chips, or how to incorporate dark leafy greens into your soups and stews. Same thing with seafood. Think about, okay, a lot of people don't have a sardine or anchovy game. How can we help you work on those food categories? But those are some of my favorite foods. In the book, I have a list of power players, and there are things like this: anchovies, wild salmon, red peppers. There's some nuts like cashews and seeds. Pumpkin seeds are great. Another one of my power players is dark chocolate. And so when I see somebody who has anxiety and depression, I'm not wanting to overwhelm them with this list of foods or make them feel horrible that they don't eat these foods. I hope it's a much more kind of hopeful and empowering message that if you're not eating any seafood and you haven't been taking any omega-3 fats, there's some opportunity here to maybe put some points on the board in terms of fighting depression and anxiety. And if you don't eat a lot of plants and you haven't eaten a lot of fermented foods, wow, the data suggests your microbiome, which are all the bacteria in your gut, it's not as optimized as it could be to fight depression and anxiety. Let's try and add those foods in and see if that helps you. And I think it's thinking about nutrition as one of the arrows in our quiver when it comes to fighting and beating mental health disorders.
You mentioned the gut microbiome. Let's go a bit deeper in there and talk about what's actually happening. Why are we trying to build that up in a healthy way? How does that specifically impact our brain health?
I like to think about the example of a zoo. So if you have a zoo and you're a zookeeper, you've got all these different foods that you have to feed all the different animals. And if you just, for example, fed your zoo all meat, like pretty soon you'd have like Jesse's Super Lion Tiger Zoo. And we kind of saw the Netflix special. We saw how that went, right? So you want to feed a diverse set of plants to your microbiome. And the microbiome is a collection of mostly bacteria that are living in your colon. Because when you feed them a more diverse set of fibers, you're growing a healthier microbiome. That means bacteria that are going to release signals and produce more food for you. Not food in a bad way, like they're not going to make you obese or anything like that. It's much more that these bacteria they kind of give back to us, both in the forms of different vitamins and minerals. They feed the inside of our colon. Actually, it's this really interesting way that they work for us. And they also regulate inflammation. So if you're eating lots of sugar and lots of fast food, what's happening is it's kind of like feeding the zoo only meat. You're growing more of these kind of more inflammatory bacteria. You're not having a lot of diversity in your microbiome, and therefore, over time, uh, the thought is this helps promote more inflammation and therefore more depression and more anxiety.
Can we get a little bit more into the specifics of when you have the healthy microbiome, how it specifically communicates with the brain, the connection between the two?
Yeah, there's a couple ways that we understand this happens. A lot of times this gets kind of misrepresented. People say, "Oh, like 95 of the percent of the serotonin in your body is in your gut," and it's like that's true, but it's different than the serotonin in your brain in the sense that it's not like it's a pool of serotonin that then goes up to your brain. So the way that the microbiome communicates with the brain, some of that is facilitated. A lot of it's facilitated through the vagus nerve. It's this really long nerve that kind of hangs down from your brain, travels through your diaphragm, and kind of like I don't know, sits like the roots of a tree, sensing your gut. And your microbiome communicates with this in a few ways. One, those bugs make the same neurotransmitters that we do. They make GABA and serotonin and dopamine. The other is they make these things called exocrine factors. And exocrine factors, they're both made by the microbiome, but they're also made by some of the cells that line the gut. And so as they're sensing the gut, they're kind of squirting out chemical signals to the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve, again, it's this neurological highway between the gut and the brain. And so that's some of how, you can imagine. Imagine in your colon, there's this like riotous punk rock party. It's like wild times. It's like craziness, not, let's just say, the most, calm and peaceful thing going on. Right. And your brain kind of hears about this through the vagus nerve versus like, it's all mellow. It's like people hugging and like singing kumbaya and, yeah, your brain's like, what's going on in there? It's like, it's all good down here in the gut brain. It's like, okay, good. It's like, so the idea is eating more plants and more fermented foods is one of the ways that you can think about, is your diet really feeding your mental health or not?
Let's talk more about that serotonin that's made in the gut and that's down there because that is something that comes up an awful lot. People talking about, you know, the heavy predominance of serotonin in your body is in your gut or being made in your gut and the assumption is that is going to the brain. So talk more about how that is different and what the purpose of that serotonin is if it's not facilitating, activity and a purpose in the brain.
So, serotonin is probably one of the most misrepresented molecules in wellness and neuroscience right now. You only have about 500,000 serotonin neurons in your brain. None of them are in your new brain. They sit kind of midbrain, and their projections extend forward into the frontal lobes in the more modern brain. Serotonin also isn't the happiness molecule. I mean, serotonin is involved in weight, it's involved in cognition, it's involved in sex drive, it's involved in irritability. I mean, it does so much more than just regulate our mood. So, it's just a misrepresentation. It's true. There's a lot of serotonin in your gut. There's also a lot of dopamine and a lot of GABA and a lot of other things. And and it's interesting. I think often it gets used to try and get people either excited about the potential of the gut to help with mental health disorders, or it gets used to undermine serotonin as an important player as mental health. But my feeling about serotonin is we should all be talking about BDNF. And if you're just talking about serotonin or worried about SSRIs or antidepressant efficacy, it's kind of like the vegan like meat eater argument. It's just I don't know. It feels like 1995 to me. Like I'm so kind of I just not very I don't find that to be a very interesting argument anymore because what's most important is thinking about how do we through our personal lifestyle help actualize more brain health, more brain growth, less inflammation. Right? For some people that's with plants, for some people that's with more meat, but like that's the question that we should be contending with and worrying about. And um but yeah, there's a lot of serotonin in your body. There's a lot of serotonin in your platelets. No one's being like, oh, you know what I should do? I should get some of Jesse's platelets and eat them later tonight to boost my serotonin, right? It's like,
Well, you talked about BDNF there and the importance of it. We can't just let it go there.
sorry. I went on a rant about serotonin.
No,
BDNF is
that's great. I think it's important we go there with serotonin. But let's talk BDNF now and talk about specifically what that is. How do we go about controlling the amount of it in our body, and why is it important?
BDNF, for everyone listening, is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. If there's one goal in my work, if you remember anything from this podcast, my hope is that it'll increase your BDNF. And the reason is BDNF is like a master hormone. It's a hormone, or it's a neurohormone is what it's called, that regulates brain growth. And it does this in a couple of different ways. One, it regulates whether there's the birth of new neurons in our hippocampus. So you actually give birth to a few new brain cells every day. And how many you give birth to really is dictated by this molecule BDNF. So more brain cells, that sounds good to me. I bet that sounds good to you. And in the data, that's good. Uh, so it's very exciting to me that there's this process that, wow, like what promotes more BDNF? And it's all the stuff that we know works for depression. Antidepressants boost BDNF. Meditation and psychotherapy boost BDNF. Foods that are high in vitamin B12 and omega-3 fats and zinc seem to boost BDNF. So there's this really interesting kind of shift, maybe, that instead of just thinking, okay, depression, chemical imbalance, more serotonin, let's use these meds. I mean, I use lots of serotonin medicines in my practice, but this idea that we, for some people, can think about depression and anxiety as having to do with inflammation or dysbiosis, or not having the right bacteria in their microbiome, and these things kind of leading to a final common pathway of a disruption in putting their brain in break grow mode by disrupting BDNF expression.
Can we talk about a number of foods that influence more BDNF?
Like my favorite, so there aren't really a lot of studies about more foods directly impacting BDNF. There's only one, and it was a study in Spain where they gave people nuts, and they found that, and they gave people olive oil. And these were folks who were on the Mediterranean diet. They found that individuals who were given nuts and ate nuts were protected. They had a 78% lower risk of having severely low BDNF levels, or what was called severely low by the researchers. BDNF is not a perfect biomarker. I wish it were, that we could like measure your BDNF level, boost it, brain is growing, all things good. So we look at, there are 6 nutrients that influence BDNF: magnesium, zinc, B12. There are some flavanols in plants, and then the long chain fats. And that's where, again, when you think about what do these food categories come from? Why am I saying eat more seafood? Why am I saying more leafy greens, more nuts and beans? Is because those are the food categories that have the most of these nutrients. And so if we're going to try and really have you on a diet where you're really feeding your brain, you're really promoting brain growth, it's going to be the foods that contain the most of these nutrients that promote BDNF. At least that's my hope.
So, up to this point, we've talked a lot about different foods and their influence on mental health. What we haven't gone into is supplementation. I'm curious if in your practice, in your personal life, supplementation plays, a big role or even a small role in supplementing an already healthy diet.
Not really. I mean, certainly with some patients in clinical work and specific situations where it's my job to treat anxiety or depression, and someone, let's say, doesn't eat seafood, or someone is really anxious at night, and is helped by maybe taking a little, I don't know, magnesium, or is from a culture where taking a little shot of something kind of is helpful to them. I'll occasionally, use some omega-3 fats, some fish oil usually, or for vegans, algal oil. Certainly in the winter, I make sure my patients are taking vitamin D. There's some data on supplemental magnesium and zinc, but I tend not to prescribe a lot of supplements, Jesse. My main feeling is that the more people can focus on foods that are high in those nutrients, the more their health is going to be better served. There's certainly some other, there are some various herbs, like supplements, be it L-theanine or St. John's wort or rhodiola, that they have really interesting mental health data, and occasionally I'll use those. But I think about those just like I think about medicines. I'm very neutral. Like a lot of people think, oh, like Zoloft and St. John's wort are, different categories. And I don't. I think they're both things that I'm giving somebody, I'm prescribing. So then I'm on the hook for it. If it causes a side effect, if it works, if it doesn't work, like that's for me really, it's an important, it's an important thing. I want it, it just, it determines how good of a doctor I am in some way. And so there aren't a lot of things I put my faith in, but there are a few.
And what are your thoughts on soil depletion and our degradation of soil quality over the years? Even if we're eating, a lot of healthy foods, these days we're not necessarily guaranteed we're getting, the same nutrition we would if the soil was healthier. In a general sense here.
In a general sense, I think that we rely on a lot of monocultures and of crops, and there's really soil is quite depleted. It's depleted of fertility, and we put that in via chemical fertilizers. I think that there's a lot of complexity and challenges as we scale our population and the planet, and we think about scaling food, and it's really challenging. I think, or at least I hope, there is a real revitalization that's happening in small local farms. My vegetables, my soil sucks in Crawford County, Indiana, but let me tell you, my vegetables are delicious, and my soil in my garden and where we're planting food is really good. It's got lots and lots of truckloads of manure and old wood chips and leaves and grass cuttings, and it's been down there brewing with the worms and everything for a couple of years. So um, and that's how, all small produce farmers, they're focused on soil health. They're focused on really uh, having rich, highly productive soil. So um, I also think that, how to put this, there's so much to focus on. And I think for me as a clinician, while it's true that there's a kind of massive crisis in soil and soil fertility around the globe that's slowly unraveling or slowly coming to light, for the individual eater as a clinician, what I really try and focus on is how can people get their hands in the soil more? How can people get more plants in their diet? And sometimes for people, that's like organic deliciousness from the farmer's market. Sometimes that's like a conventional bag of celery from a big box store. And I think that uh, it's one of those kind of, I would say, like the levels of things. Like, I start with like, can you fill the plates with a lot of plants and seafood, lots of nuts and beans? So my little rhyme: seafood, greens, nuts and beans, and a little dark chocolate. And then how can you start to optimize those things, both in terms of your consumption, your taste, your price point, your sourcing?
But overall, are you an advocate of non-GMO and organic produce when possible?
I'm an advocate of organic, non-GMO produce. I'm
For
more an
yourself, for your patients, if people are open to that.
Yep, yep. If people ask me, what do I buy for my family? I buy organic whenever I can. Are there times that I don't? Yeah, for sure. I'll buy conventional frozen blueberries sometimes if I can't find organic, or if it's too expensive. I'll buy certain things like onions, for example, where I'm not as concerned about pesticides as something like kale or my greens, or usually my blueberries, where I'm eating the skin. um, the GMO argument, I think, is really complex and confusing. I mean, so often those are just, if you're eating GMO foods, you're mostly eating processed foods. And so I think I kind of avoid that because I don't really try and buy anything that has a food label. Maybe my pasta, but I think that if you're kind of caught up in reading labels and kind of really focused on that aspect, there's a way that I think for some people, they're getting pulled into a layer of processed food that's really pernicious, where it's like the healthy eaters who feel they're eating healthy because there's certain labels on their foods as opposed to actual nutrition.
And what are the biggest culprits in that department?
Oh, I would say low-fat flavored yogurt products, and the non-dairy variations of that. Uh, I would say breakfast cereals. I think protein bars end up in that category. Um, a lot of them, and powders. Um, Those are a few that pop in my mind. I'm trying to think of other sort of the healthy GMO organic. I think often it's where I see them, um, on something like if it's an organic non-GMO graham cracker. It's like it. it's still a cookie you're putting on your s'more. It's not like the fact it's GMO organic, like that doesn't matter. Like that's not a food that's good for you. Like don't be confused that spending more money or making it organic is in any way changing the fact that it's not good for your health. Or like you can get like the organic non-GMO toasted O's or Cheerios or whatever the breakfast cereal is, but like come on. It's like that doesn't make it good for you or any healthier for your kid. So that's I think where for me those labels just being like that just means you're eating breakfast cereal and trying to justify it. And if you're going to eat breakfast cereal, you should just eat oatmeal. And if it's anything other than oatmeal, maybe a little muesli. I don't know. I think you're crawled into bed with processed food, and it's not the best thing for your health.
I get what you're saying. Can you take me through what a typical day would look like? What do you eat in the morning for lunch, snacks? Are you having your biggest meal at dinner?
Trying to think. I mean, my typical day of eating goes something like this. I usually wake up naturally at about 6 a.m. and I either have a cup of Earl Grey tea with maybe just a little bit of our farm honey, or I have a cup of black coffee. And I'm usually not very hungry. And then I will either have like sometimes I like oatmeal with I only have a couple things. I have oatmeal with cinnamon, berries, and nuts, probably no sweetener. Um, or I'll have like a couple of fried or scrambled eggs, or something like avocado toast if I'm in a carby mood, or toast with my eggs. Um, but sometimes I'll skip that and I'll kind of make it. I don't know. I'll get hungry around lunchtime. Um, Lunch for me is usually a mix of raw vegetables, cucumbers, red peppers, a small serving of soup, usually any type of soup. Lentils makes me happy, but some sort of bean soup usually. Like I had white beans. There's a little like leftover chicken noodle soup. Um, I love a lot of protein at lunch, so hummus, uh, um, seafood like little poached salmon or lox. Um, and then usually midday, like snack of dark chocolate or nuts, cashews. I'll have like a bar of dark chocolate that I nibble on. I try not to do that with patients too much, but I'll like pop a little in my mouth and that sounds hard. Mm. Um, yeah, I like cashews, dark chocolate, pumpkin seeds, and then dinner is usually like a big pan roasted veggies. If you want to see my dinner, I put it on Instagram a fair amount. You can see all of my various dinners where you'll see that there's a boring mix of carbs. Like I like brown rice and wild salmon for protein and grass fed beef, and usually a bunch of open roasted vegetables. I was just sort of I don't know. It's a habit we're in where I just do a whole rainbow: cabbage, asparagus, peppers, and just put them on the sheet pan with olive oil, salt, and pepper. Slide them in. Oftentimes we'll par bake like some potatoes. Like I love like oven baked potato. I'm a big fan of potatoes. I think they're just a great food for the microbiome, especially if you let them cool. Um, yeah, that's kind of that's mostly what I'll eat during the pandemic. Is I'm like regress sad and living, every night like hanging out with my kids. Definitely, there's more cookies and ice cream than is generally in my diet. Um, just to be transparent. And Triscuits, like I never eat Triscuits, but my dad buys them. I live with my parents. What can I say? They're comforting. Um, that that sounds like my diet there.
All right. And how old are your kids? And do they embrace eating this way, or do you get some resistance?
Some my kids are 10 and 7. Our daughter's 10, and there's certain things our daughter like loves my wild salmon burgers, but was complaining about the um, oven baked salmon yesterday is not tasting good. So they I think um, well they're allowed mostly to do what they want in the sense that we we all eat the same thing. Maybe that's not true. We'd probably need to ask them, Jesse. It just doesn't feel fair to speak for them. I think that there's some things that they don't like, and they don't have to eat, but we've worked hard to find a lot of foods we all agree on. So lentils, cucumbers, red peppers. Do my kids eat big kale salads? No, but they'll eat kale chips and they'll eat a little bit of kale salad, and they will love they'll devour like a kale mac and cheese. I mean, pounds of kale will go into these children. So they've taught me a lot, frankly, about, like our notions of food. Like, does your kid like kale or not? Right? It's sort of how I thought about it before I was a parent. And then it's like, it really depends. Like, does your kid eat seafood? Like, mostly, sometimes. Like, they love a lox on a bagel and they'll eat salmon most of the time. And they love sushi, oddly. And sometimes they love shrimp, right? And so, uh, it's been kombucha. They're big kombucha drinkers. They love the booch. So it's been a really interesting. Interesting is a bad word. It's been really complex, balancing being a parent, the time constraints of that, the budget constraints of that, and the taste constraints of a kid, and still also really feeling like you're doing your best to feed their mental health and feed their brain health.
What I'm hearing you saying is you're giving an array of healthy foods and kind of letting them pick and choose, you know, their direction a little bit. Because what I'm getting at here, I'm sure a lot of people listening, maybe there's somebody that's having a mental health challenge who's listening and they're ready to make a dietary shift. And maybe they're the cook of the family and they have young kids. And it's like, how do I it's enough for somebody to make this kind of shift for themselves. But when they have maybe some resistance from the kids, how do they go about, from again, your N of one, this is a personal question, but how do you go about navigating that as a parent?
I usually like us all to eat the same thing, but sometime, like if I'm feeling down and I really want my sardine pasta, because that doesn't like put me in a good mood right away, but it just, I don't know, it's like a placebo effect on me. It's like the sardine SIBO effect, where it's just I usually feel better the next day. And I don't want to force my kids to eat sardine pasta. Like, would you eat it at home as a kid? Like, oh, my weird psychiatrist dad forced me to eat like sardine gnocchi. But I like them to have a little taste of it. And so I think for parents who, or for people living in a home with other eaters, I think you really want to try and do little small things. So it's where if you're trying to incorporate more seafood, can you have it as something you add on? Or can you, when other people order in sushi? Or can you do something like, make the salmon burgers, but when people are out of the house, so it doesn't stink up the house like salmon? Although it doesn't stink up the house that much. And I think for parents, focusing on things like more plants, more raw vegetables. We serve the vegetables before the other food. It's funny, you ask kids, like, do you like vegetables? Like, no. Then you put down like cut up, veggies, peppers, a little bit of whatever, salad dressing, olive oil, and lemon juice. And it's like all the veggies disappear. And so that's a trick that we do in our home. But I would focus on like the plants and then oven roasting, because with the oven roasting, they kind of caramelize a little bit, and that just is it's a little sweeter, more palatable. And then listen to your kids. If they say like broccoli tastes like crap and it's super bitter, it does to them. Like, don't traumatize each other. Find other plants. There's like a bazillion other vegetables. See if they like sweet potatoes. See if they like potatoes. I also get the kids involved where like we'll have smoothie lab. I'll just put stuff out and let them mix it together, and try not to make it gross is my advice. Like, I want you to drink it. Like, this isn't, don't waste food is a big rule in our house. I get them involved in cooking. Both my kids had plastic knives by the time they could like hold a knife, and now both chop with sharp adult knives. And getting them involved. My son doesn't eat tons of plants, but he has this world famous pepper salad, which is like chopped up red peppers, orange peppers, and yellow peppers with olive oil and lemon juice. So now you know the recipe, but it's such a treat when he joins us in the kitchen and he makes that, right? And it's so fun to watch him devour it and have us devour it, because what a nice thing to have some younger member of the family contributing to making the food. So I think you look for the wins like that, and then I emphasize why. I say like we eat our plants because they're good for our gut, and also I have a great partner in this. My wife is really, we're a united front when it comes to this stuff. Both being flexible, like we're not jerks to each other when, I don't know, we need to pick up pizza because we're lazy or sad or don't feel like cooking or whatever. But also when it's time to like up the ante and eat better, we're both on board to help out with that. So I think that's the other thing. If you're a parent and you're worried about introducing this to the kids, like, get your partner on board in some way. with some small steps and some small intentions, and just try something new and make it fun. Right? If you're not eating a lot of plants, start out with fruit salad for dessert. Everybody loves fruit salad, right? If if you haven't done beans and rice for dinner in a long time, like do beans and rice for dinner with lots of salsa and guacamole and corn tortillas. Everybody loves a bean taco and a corn tortilla with salsa and guacamole. So there's all kinds of ways I think to have it be more fun for kids. And but I certainly appreciate the question, Jesse, and I think it can seem really intimidating at times.
And when it comes to your wife, was her influence into eating healthier, was that through you? And, wanting to figure out what the best diet is, working with patients to help them with their mental health. And then in turn, you've taken on this healthy way of eating as well. You're talking about your kids eating healthy. Were you the influence on her, would you say, to eat this alternative way? Or was she kind of rubbing on you? Or was there a piece of both of you that kind of came together and formed your philosophy? I'm just curious how that all unfolded.
So I would say initially I influenced my wife in terms of cooking and nutrition. And we've been together before I was a nutritional psychiatrist because we've been married for 20 years now. And so I kind of probably brought the nutrition uh, conscientiousness and cooking initially to the relationship. Um, and then that began to shift really, both as we had kids, and she was more in a primary caretaker role, and kind of running food in the house a little bit more. And then as our tastes and palate adapted, really through the books and the work of her, really being just a great partner in all of those projects, and um, really helping us as a family really walk the talk, which was just important to both of us as having purpose-driven lives and being authentic. That if we're going to talk about seafood, we're going to eat seafood. And if we're going to, promote more leafy greens, those are foods we're going to eat. So it's it's sort of hard, like anything that you grow together with. It's hard to disentangle. Certainly I cooked more, and I introduced her to some food, and she'd never eaten sushi. We're both Midwesterners, and I remember being a young medical student, we're dating and taking her to this Japanese restaurant in Indianapolis, and it was like so fun and exotic. I guess as I was saying, as I was exiting vegetarianism, the first thing I'd eat a little sushi. I didn't have much. I'd have like a shrimp and like some veggie rolls, but yeah, I did have a little bit in there. That was rare, but that was a good example of. And then we travel a lot together, and so we just got to be in a lot of weird spaces with food, like living in Kenya for months, and eating the traditional diet there, or just traveling around and kind of feeding ourselves on a budget. So it's like I said, it's hard to disentangle who's. I give her, I hope, enough credit, because it's certainly some of the things like the lentil soup in my new book is directly inspired by her. Her lentil soup is simple and amazing. Um, that's one, the wild salmon burgers or something that we make a lot of. And then the oven roasted vegetables. I mean, I would say that probably the oven roasted French fry, the pan roasted French fry. I mean, that I got to give her full credit for that. The par baking, and then with the olive oil, she does a really good one. That's all her.
Nice. And Drew, I'm picturing someone coming to work with you in the beginning. They're, say they're feeling depressed and life's really getting them down. And then all of a sudden they're trying to make this big dietary switch and try and eat healthier. They're on board for that, but their motivation to, really get in the kitchen and get cooking might be low, especially in the beginning when they're still feeling quite under the weather. How does somebody, because I mean, it is for anybody, it's a big learning curve to start including some of these foods. But I can imagine somebody who is feeling down, this could be an extra layer on top of that. So, how do you go about easily facilitating a dietary shift in somebody who is, say, depressed?
Well, I think that's where the importance of having some training in nutritional psychiatry helps. It's where we really tried to now train hundreds of clinicians to do this responsibly, because I think you're right. It can be overwhelming. I think so many people with depression and anxiety, they just get so much advice thrown at them. And so I think, for example, your statement of making big changes, we really try not to frame it that way. As I had a patient on Tuesday, I saw her and I said, and we're talking about things she could really do that were important. And I just put it out of my mouth. I said, I really want you to be mindful because there's so much healthy food you're eating, but I don't even feel like you're seeing it. I want you to sit with maybe it's an avocado and just you the avocado and some olive oil and some salt. And I just tried to blurt that out of my mouth. So just, I don't know, an example. And I saw her today and she said, I did that avocado thing you're talking about. I just sat down with half of an avocado and some olive oil and some salt and a spoon. I just spent like a few minutes with it, ate it. It was really good for me. And so uh, I think that threading that needle between overwhelming people with you got to eat seafood and fermented food and lots of beans and don't forget pepitas and oh, don't you like anchovies? Eat more anchovies. Between something that sounds like that and hey, Jesse, what are you having for dinner tonight? And hearing what you're having for dinner and thinking about that and not really feeling a need to like change a lot about it, but hear about it. And just by having a little awareness of talking about it and awareness of this food categories, everybody listening tonight, you can see like, does that help you think more clearly? You look at your plate, do you see some rainbows? Do you see some plants? Are there some fermented foods you've eaten this week? Some of the things also I feel are really helpful in the treatment of depression, Jesse, like things where people with depression don't have an appetite. So boom, brain food smoothie. Like, let's talk blender. Like, what are you blending up? And where you can really have fun. It's like, you put a scoop of ice cream in there in the morning, put a banana in there, put lots of cinnamon in there, put some nuts in there, and be like, I have a milkshake in the morning. It's like, I had a milkshake the other day in the morning. I wasn't feeling so good. It was amazing. It also had all of those amazing nutrients for my brain. And usually I don't have a scoop of ice cream in there. Usually I just put water and ice in there. And again, if you don't have a lot of an appetite, you can get a lot of both calories and nutrition in a little smoothie or favorite snacks. I find a lot of people don't have much appetite when they're depressed. So how about having a little kind of Mediterranean platter that you can quickly put together? Just a little bit of hummus and a little feta cheese and you know, um, cut up some cucumbers or peppers or, is there some way that you can make yourself just a little, again, as you think about that plate, you see colors, you see plant protein. Um, so that's the hope is just give people little wins like that.
So what I'm hearing you saying is start where people are, aim for the little wins, hopefully build momentum, and then over time you can, ramp things up.
For sure. I think you're hearing it exactly right. You sound like a good nutritional psychiatrist, Jesse.
Earlier you touched on, I know we got to part ways here soon, Drew, but earlier you touched on inflammation. And I think it's important we cover why this is a big deal when it comes to mental health. What are some of the factors that are commonly causing inflammation? And then some specific food choices that we can make that can help dampen that.
For sure. It's a great question. I have a whole chapter in the new book, Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, on inflammation. It's really one of the ways that we increasingly want to understand mental health disorders. It's interesting that depression, just having depression, increases the amount of inflammatory factors in your body. I mean, blood levels just go up with things like interleukin 6. And so there's this kind of almost chicken and egg effect, right? If we give people inflammatory factors in the lab, or you have more of inflammatory factors running through your blood, you're more likely to have a low mood. And when we give people these things, like hepatitis C gets treated with one of the interleukins. And actually, before you get the treatment, they start you on an antidepressant because 50% of people who get them get severe depression. And so inflammation clearly causes depression, clearly causes anxiety, clearly causes cognitive fog. And so it's one of those nice new pieces of neuroscience that allow us to better treat anxiety and depression. In terms of what causes the inflammation, it's a lot of things. The one that we're talking about today is diet, and that just people not getting enough nutrients. So 96% of Americans don't get enough of vitamin E, which is a powerful fat soluble antioxidant. Half of people don't get enough zinc. People don't get enough magnesium. You just run down the list of important nutrients that you need to fight inflammation. People don't get enough of them. And then on top of that, we eat foods that are inflammatory. So part of the reason eating lots of sugar is no good is you get this big spike in blood sugar, then you get this big spike in insulin, then you have lots and lots of extra calories just kind of floating around in your body. it just leads to a lot of inflammation. It leads to the growth of more pro-inflammatory bacteria in your gut. And so that's some of the ways that diet increase inflammation. Then there's some other things that people can do, right? People sleep very poorly in generally, low quality sleep. People drink a lot of alcohol. A lot of folks still smoke cigarettes. There's a lot of things that we can do to decrease our inflammation. A lot of people are exposed to some environmental toxins, or if you're always like burning candles in your house and you don't have an air filter, either stopping burning the candle or getting a air filter or doing both, that could potentially make a really big difference in your inflammation. And so these are all kind of uh, um, one of, in some ways, the arrows in our quiver as we think about, all right, what's something we can modify? This comes from some studies, by the way. There's meta-analyses looking at hundreds of thousands of patients. There were two of them came out in 2020, looking at if people get an antidepressant and they got an anti-inflammatory of any type, the risk of getting better from the depression went up in one study by a factor of two. Twice as many people got better as they had the anti-inflammatory and the antidepressant, which is kind of interesting. And then another interesting tidbit, a lot of the really popular antidepressants like Prozac, they're powerful anti-inflammatory molecules. And so inflammation is a really important concept. I'm glad you asked about it in terms of us thinking, okay, are there things that are signaling to me that I have inflammation? When I see my doctor next time, can I get a C-reactive protein or a homocysteine added onto my blood panel to kind of check into this? Do I have a lot of achiness in my joints? Are there some signs I have that I've got too much inflammation? And then what can I do about it?
All right, Drew, I think that's a good place to end it. We've gotten into tons, covered a lot here. Other than listeners getting a copy of Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, how can they connect with you after the show?
Well, the most important thing for me, for everybody listening, is that I hope that something that we said today really sticks with you in some way, challenges some notion you have about food, or gets you excited about it. I don't know, purslane or incubating chickens or trying seafood. I really just, the most important thing for me is that you take from this some way that you might think about feeding your mental health. And if you want to follow me on Instagram or check out our downloads on drewramseymd.com, that would be great too. I'd love to hear your stories of how something impacted you or how some of this piqued your interest in nutritional psychiatry. And Jesse, thanks for the opportunity to share with everyone some information about the book and information about, what I hope people feel is an empowering message. Not that we don't need therapy or that we don't need meds, but that there's things we can do in our everyday lives to take care of our mental health, and that food's one of them. And it's been great to be with everybody for a little bit.
Thank you, Drew. Really enjoyed this. Take care.
Take care.